welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your New Year, 95% the same me, host Madelyn.
I'm your I'll start writing the 5 in about 2 weeks, host Emma.
And thanks for tuning into this week's show. It's Emma's side quest.
Yes.
Which is great. I love the end of your episode. It's given me an extra week to play games before save data comes up. Emma, what are we talking about this week?
This week, we're on brand for the new year. The brand of the new year, you might say.
The New Year brand.
Yeah. We're going to be talking about how to begin a game, which, if you Google that phrase...
How to start a game.
Yes, how to start a game. Well, I'm sorry, no, if you Google how to begin a game, you get a lot of responses about how to start making your own game.
Yeah.
If you Google how to start a game, or how to open a game, trying new things, trying different phrasings, you'll get a lot of tutorials on how to launch a game from your computer.
Which is exactly what we're talking about this week.
Yeah, this is just a big tutorial. We're getting in on the tutorialization game of trying to make sure you understand how to use your technology.
So let's jump in. Fire up the old laptop. Just kidding. This is a very Madelyn-coded Talk This side quest pick.
Why is it Madelyn-coded?
Because it's like thematic. I feel like you don't usually do time of year thematic side quest picks. When you picked this, I was like, dang, like I would have done this if only I'd thought of it.
Well, this isn't like, the other part of it isn't like timely, but I've been thinking for a while about like, there's always, whenever like a long game comes out, there's always at least one or two little pieces that's like, you just got to get past the first 10 hours. And I always look at that and I'm like, what does that mean? Right?
Yeah.
Like, you get this sometimes with like TV shows or movies.
I was going to say, I feel like with shows.
It's like, if you just get past the essential building blocks of the show, then it's good. If only we'd skipped that and just gotten to the climactic fight,
It's just really hard to introduce stuff, There's a reason that season 2 of any given TV sitcom is always the best season.
Sure, yeah.
Right? You need time to set up the pieces so that you can play with them.
Yeah. And, like, I get it, right? I get the feeling behind those articles of like, oh, you start to get like all your mechanics and you're used to the characters now, and so you can like start playing around with it. But like a lot of times, like that first 5 to 10 hours for like a really long game can be important to making sure that things that happen in like hour 60 mean anything to you.
Yeah.
Right? So it's always interesting to get those and think about like the perspective on the actual like setup and start of a game never being anyone's favorite part of a game. But also how important it is, or else they're going to start dropping it after 5 hours, right? So
it's really challenging. And at the same time in games, like games I think even have it harder than any other medium because a book doesn't have to teach you how to read.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
and also you're not suddenly expecting to like, you're not reading the book and you're like, yeah, but when do I come into it?
Right.
I guess if you picked up like a choose your own adventure book and like there was like 80 pages before you made your first choice, you'd start being a little confused. But usually in a book, you're not like, okay, but when am I gonna press the book buttons now, right? So
I'm just like, we'll get to talking about opening lines and stuff later. I'm just imagining somebody reading Moby Dick and he goes, call me Ishmael. And you're like, dang it, why are we still in a cutscene? Like, I should have control. I should be able to call him Ishmael.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, man.
But yeah, so you both have to teach the player to interact with the game, but also a lot of times your player is expecting to be able to interact with your game, like, pretty snappily.
Yeah.
Right? They want to be starting to use your controller. So you don't have a lot of time to, like, have your big cutscene, thing, unless you've like established yourself like Kojima or whatever.
Right, Kojima can do it.
Although
if you open
even then, Death Stranding does get started pretty quickly on that hype walking gameplay. So
hype.
Yeah.
No, it is always interesting because I do it too. I definitely do it when recommending things or thinking about things, being like, you just have to get through the first couple episodes and it gets better.
Yeah.
And that's so funny as a way to talk about a leisure time activity.
Yeah.
But of course, that's how we talk about exercise too. It's just like a weird mentality in general, right? We don't enjoy struggle or setup.
Yeah.
Got to be all payoff.
Yeah.
So I really unfortunately talk this branded, but I do feel like in researching this episode, it did become clear to me that like nobody does the game intro better than Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah.
Like, I'm really sorry to say it. It sounds like I'm just saying that because this is this podcast and we don't talk about Kingdom Hearts as much as we used to because they aren't releasing new games ever. And I'm not.
We're saving up time, right? We're waiting. Once Kingdom Hearts 4 comes out, it'll be all we're talking about for like a year and a half.
It will be a 5-hour episode. Walking through each world.
But yeah, really the secret, skeleton key to unlocking your video game is to get Utada Hikaru to give you a pop anthem and set a cool intro to it,
Those songs make me angry now.
Why do they make you angry?
Like, whenever they come up on, so Click My Boyfriend and I have an Anime Jams playlist that we include game songs on, and also occasionally songs from the Japanese Shiba Inus that we follow on Instagram.
Of course.
It's just sort of general Japanese media miscellany. And whenever like Face My Fears comes on, we feel rage.
Why do you feel rage?
Because it's like, how dare she be doing like a looping, like a lyric that kind of like loops back around? How dare she have like a backwards portion in some of these songs? How dare she say, "My heart's a battleground" at any point in these lyrics? Like, it just makes me angry how much Tetsuya must have had to be like, here is what happens in this game.
It's actually so funny to think that like Face My Fears does have so much like thoughts about Kingdom Hearts 3 when Simple and Clean, at least the English version, nothing.
Zero.
Just nothing to do with the game whatsoever.
Doesn't matter. They heard it. They're like, this will be a banger that we can make 20 different versions of. So
admittedly, I know nothing about like the actual translation of the Japanese lyrics and whether those are more relevant at all, but the English version definitely
not even a little bit. Doesn't matter.
The vibes are right.
And that is what I think became clear to me as I looked at all of this, is that there is nothing more important. There is no more important thing that you can do in an intro than somehow capture the vibes.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of other advice that we'll talk about like you should introduce your characters or themes or the world, and that's all fine and well and good. But no matter if you are doing some kind of cinematic intro or like an opening level or whatever it is, like there's absolutely nothing you can do that is more important than figure out something vaguely hooky and vibey and do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why I was thinking about this and I couldn't find any like articles like really backing me up on this. Although there was one game developer one that was like, this is a good way to do it. But I feel like games start in media res a lot.
Yes.
And I think that's because, especially for a longer game, right, you can get more of its vibes. Like Persona 5, for example.
Yep.
Like, it opens with something that happens pretty late in the game, right? But it much more is like capturing the feeling of what Persona 5 wants you to feel. I mean, actually, it starts with a creepy voice asking you to accept that this is a work of fiction, which also kind of captures the vibes for what it's worth.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I think games will start that Like the Uncharted 2 you also brought up, like when you're climbing up that train. That's very much the vibes of Uncharted, right? But also is not like where the story starts.
In Uncharted 2, there's a train that's like hanging off a cliff and you have to climb up it.
Yes.
I haven't played Uncharted 2, so I had to learn that. No, you can learn it.
Yes, but he's in a train, he has to climb up the train. It's a big set piece. But obviously it does not then return to right after he escapes that train. We go back in time to start the story again. But you put that hook there for the
most common game, probably, this is not even true at all, but a very common game intro tactic is the you're probably rendering.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So if you can't come up with anything, that little record scratch moment.
Yeah.
But it makes sense, right? I mean, it solves the issue of when is it my turn?
Yep.
If you're going to start in the middle. And it solves the issue of, like, you're going to have, ideally, in your game, there's going to be some progression in your abilities and what you're able to do. And if you don't get, like, the fun limit abilities until Chapter 7, well, let's give you a taste of that so you don't think it's just, like, whack the sword.
Yeah.
My other thing is, like, I feel like the best way to make an intro is to think about, if I have to make an intro that people love so much that all of my game intros have to kind of like be this forever, what would it be?
What do you mean?
Like, all of the Fallout ones are like, there's some throwback music playing and we pan out and we see a devastated city or whatever, and somebody says, war, am I right? So just
I think that's the direct quote. Yeah.
So like, or if you're Kojima, you better be ready that like you've made one iconic like 3-hour opening cinematic, so like now you have to do that every time. Or
the Borderlands ones.
Yeah, Borderlands ones are, I mean, look, mad funny.
Very mad funny, yeah.
But are, regardless of your feelings or critical feelings about Borderlands and whether they vibe with you or not, like the openings definitely capture what the game is pretty successfully.
Yeah.
Sort of bombastic, kind of like chatting with you, addressing the player tongue in cheek, like definitely catch the spirit of the mad funny leader shooter.
Yeah.
Or like this became very clear to me with the Kingdom Hearts intros of like, oh, actually they made a really good one the first time, and they more or less use the exact same motifs over and over and over and over.
That's just called
some guy reaching out his hand. It also, do you ever think about how in your life, I felt like in a lot of these intros or like opening scenes or whatever, there's either like the Riku reaching out the hand.
Yes,
moment.
that's called establishing a really good visual language and motif.
Yeah, but it's sick because like every time that hits, I'm like, it's like a different character. I'm like, ooh, yeah, baby, reach out the hand.
Yeah.
But there were also a bunch that I saw. We often see the like, oh no, I've fallen over, and then like somebody reaches out the hand, and you look up, and it's like it's Leon Kennedy.
Sorry, in the Kingdom Hearts intro, I think I missed
that
part.
This is separately, and I made me think about how very rarely in life. We see this in intros and game things a lot. Somebody falls over and somebody's like, let me give you a hand
How rarely
up.
you fall over?
Well, okay, no. But how rarely you fall over and then there's somebody being like, let me help you. And then you like look up.
Okay, yeah.
Just one of those things that you take for granted in a game. But how often has that happened to you in life? For me,
whenever I fall over, I look up hoping Crom Fire Emblem will be there to help me up. So.
And he might be.
One day he might be. You never know.
But yeah, ultimately, we'll talk about other game intros, but the Kingdom Hearts ones are the best. And I actually mean that both in terms of the like opening cinematics, which are just fire, obviously.
Obviously, yeah.
But I also feel like the opening level of the like sort of tutorial level of Kingdom Hearts 1 is pretty like perfectly vibey.
It's so weird.
Yeah.
I feel like it very much puts you into like this sort of dreamlike logic state successfully in that.
Oh, you know what else made me angry rewatching the Kingdom Hearts 1? How already they're doing the like, the sky turns into water and water is the sky. And It's like, I hate you. How dare you?
I mean, it's Sora and Kairi from the beginning, right?
Yeah,
So...
I know that. I mean, I know the names from the beginning, but it's just like, how dare you already be designing Skull Kylum, you mother effer. Anyway, where was I going with this? Yes. So I feel like one thing that I don't know about if you were feeling like we're talking about this or not. I feel like tutorials are like a separate episode.
Yeah, but they are like, that is part of what makes the game intro challenging too.
Yes.
I can't. Was it the Eurogamer one that I was reading? No, Tech Radar. There's a Tech Radar article called "A Game's Beginning is so important, so why is it so hard to do?" That had a line that said, "Back in the day, we used to have manuals and people would read them and we didn't have to have pop-ups, but now no one reads anymore and trees are extinct, so pop-ups."
It's so true.
Which is something to think about in that, like, old games didn't necessarily have to be as direct with their tutorials as some new games do, because they might expect you either, like, you're at the arcade and your friend is telling you how to input the fighting game combos, right?
Yep.
In terms of that, like, pass on of knowledge. Or you've also bought the manual, the strategy guide, that tells you.
Or you just literally
Parts
have the
of the
disc
game.
and you've taken the manual out.
Yeah, or you have the instruction guide that used to be in the physical copy, the tiny little instruction guide that would tell you the basic controls. So now, I feel like modern games have a problem now where it's like, they don't have these external features, so in a way they have to put the tutorial in there, but also more people have played a game before.
Yeah.
But also, maybe someone's playing your game who's never played a game before. And so, it's the double-edged sword of, like, how much am I tutorializing, and how much is just, like, annoying to the player.
It's basically impossible.
I do find it delightful, like, when the Tech Radar article was like, oh, it's immersion breaking, and, like, yeah, sure it is, but I do find it delightful when the NPC is like, you can just, if you press think about the X button.
Yeah.
When you want to jump, I think you should think about the X button.
I do find that charming. I also do find that charming in the right situations. But of course it's tricky too, because not tutorializing is like a very stylistic, artistic choice now.
Yeah.
When it used to be, I mean, obviously all of these articles that I was reading about best opening levels or best interested games are like, well, the first level in Mario is like basically the ultimate tutorial, and it never teaches you anything.
I mean, to be fair, that is sort of what you want your level to be designed as. Even if you are giving pop-ups that's like light attack square. Like, you still have a section where it's like, okay, the player's using the light attack here, right? And now we're introducing the heavy attack. And now we're introducing jump, because there's a little ledge they have to jump over, you know?
That's true, but it doesn't have any pop-ups, is what I mean.
I know. But even when you're doing pop-ups, that's generally how, in an action game at least, your first level is designed.
No, of course. So it's tricky. You're balancing a lot. You're also balancing, which article did you post that was about this? You know, obviously in games, we don't, like, it's, when you open a book, you just move right past the couple of pages that are like, it was published in Vancouver and whatever. And in games, you have to wade through all of the required logos and like a menu and maybe some loading and...
Not anymore. If your game has loading now, it's out.
It's dead.
It's dead on arrival.
No loading allowed. No one is allowed to check their text messages, ever.
And that gets rid of more tutorialization. You can't have loading screen tips anymore.
Yeah.
We used to be a proper society.
Do you think they'll have it in Okami too, so they can do the, like, little loading screen game?
I don't know. Yeah, one of the game developer articles was going over, like, the introduction to your game is not just, like, your first level, but the actual opening the game on your computer. We're going back to the how do you launch a game, you know?
Yeah.
This was by Nathan Lovato from 2015. But yeah, like, making your title screen, like, evocative, right? And and communicating something and making going through the options and setup stuff relatively smooth, and the menus feel good, right? And then your loading screen is like either interesting in some way or involves some sort of interaction, right? And then you get to your interesting level. Because if you introduce friction to the point of even getting to playing the game, you risk losing people already.
No one can have any friction. Perfectly smooth.
Which, again, is just like a different thing than I think a lot of books or movies. I guess if you get a Blu-ray and there's like unskippable previews, maybe then that would be...
That's not a thing. That hasn't been a thing in 20 years.
I know. Or you have to watch a 2-minute ad on Hulu before the thing starts, you know?
Okay, that's true. That is true. So I brought up, and Emma rightly kind of immediately schooled me on this, but in thinking about this episode, I was like, well, it's interesting to think about how in books, there are like really iconic, great opening lines, and that's like a thing, and you like know the opening lines, right? Anyone can tell me that Call Me Ishmael is the opening to Moby Dick, or it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, is the opening to A Tale of Two Cities, or take your pick, right? And like how many opening lines in games are that quotable? Like 2,
Sure,
maybe 3.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I think it's because, there's not really a lot of, like, narrators in games the same way that, like, a book has a narrator, right?
Yeah.
And I do think there are openings in games that are iconic visually, even if the game does not have, like, an iconic opening line. Like, I took this as, like, an interesting little challenge and was just looking up a bunch of opening lines in games. Love Yakuza 1. Aniki.
So good.
Iconic.
Like, absolutely encapsulates what this is going to be.
But, like...
I wonder what it was in the English dub.
I think I was looking at the English dub, actually, and I think it's Aniki.
That's even better!
But obviously, like, the more iconic beginning of Yakuza 1 is Kiryu standing over a dead body with a gun in his hand and lightning flashing from the outside, and he turns around, right? Like, that's the actual opening of Yakuza 1. There just aren't any lines there. And another one was, I looked at Final Fantasy VII, both the original and the remake. It's probably pretty much the same line in Japanese, but in the original in English, it's "Come on, newcomer, follow me," or remake, it's "Get down here, merc," which is Barrett talking to Cloud, right? But like the actual iconic part of that is before, when Aerith is kneeling by the Mako pipe, right? And then we zoom out to the city and then zoom back into the train, right? There's just not, again, there's not any lines of dialogue there.
Well, Final Fantasy VII is almost unfair, too. I mean, poor Barrett, right? But, not only is it a very visually striking, opening just sort of, independently, right? But also, as several articles reminded me, this is the first 3D Final Fantasy. So it's another thing that is sort of interesting and hard to translate to very many other mediums, except maybe film, although not even really film anymore, is like that opening is also incredibly iconic because it's like a wild technical flex.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, they what got people being like, remake it was because they did this, did the opening as like a tech demo for showing off the PS3. So they remade it. And people were like, remake after that. Because it's iconic and meant to show like a technological leap. So they had done like the Aerith and the zoom out to the city for PS3, just like as like a wow, look at these graphics type thing.
That is a big I started thinking about what are common tropes we see in all sorts of intros, but also especially iconic intros. The big city reveal is a very common opening game like, wow, let me suck you in, right? So Final Fantasy VII, obviously a great example of that. Breath of the Wild is like essentially this, right? But nature instead of city.
Right. There's a big world out there, right? Sort of.
Yes, there's a big world out there is a great way of encapsulating this. Those Fallout ones that I talked about, right, are pretty much always like, there's a big devastated world out there. And of course, the one that pretty much always tops the list of most iconic openings of all time, which is interesting to me. Why is Kingdom Hearts on none of these lists?
Because they're fake.
Yeah, because they're dumb. But BioShock, almost always near the top of the list. It's sort of the reveal of our underwater city of Rapture.
I mean, in terms of, like, reviewing the ones with, like, opening lines, like, I really do think, like, Kingdom Hearts is, I've been having these weird thoughts lately. Like, is any of this for real or not? Like, is actually, like, an iconic first line. Enough that, like, they purposely brought it back in Kingdom Hearts 3, right?
That was so sick. Yeah. But it's true. I mean, how many games can you think of where there's a line that bringing it back for a game like 15 years later, you can know that people are going to be like, oh my god.
Yeah. And like, even, you know, the war never changes or whatever. And like, extremely funny one to put against, like, Call Me Ishmael, but hey, you're finally awake.
But is incredibly iconic.
Incredibly iconic from Skyrim, right?
Yeah.
Like, everybody knows what that's from and what it's referring to.
And it's an iconic visual.
Yeah.
You can just use a photo of that man and it's a perfect meme reaction.
But I think that if you're looking for, like, opening novel vibe lines, if you look at, like, CRPGs, like Disco Elysium, like, games that actually emphasize, like, this game's about reading a lot, you know, then you might start getting some stuff. Unless you're Baldur's Gate 3, where I think the first line is technically, ugh, my head, which, not great. Sorry, Baldur's Gate 3. Could have started something stronger.
Yeah, there are some great lines you pulled here that if they were in a book, it'd be like, like, that could be a great line.
Yeah. The Near Replicant one made me sad that there aren't loading screens anymore, because the, like, first line is, like, a loading screen with, there's always loading screens with your sister's diary entries, essentially. So the first one is, like, December 22nd, the snow won't stop falling, so said he'd stay here with me until it stops. And it's like, you could do so much with loading screens, man. You could set so many vibes.
We're all about vibes here.
Now loading screens are just a fault and a flaw. Again, society. But, like, even something like The Last of Us is even, like, he's just on the phone with Tommy.
I actually sort of feel like that one could be a good literature opening line if you did the right thing with it. I do. It's so the opening line is, I'm just reading from Emma's quotes repository here. Tommy, listen to me. He is the contractor. He is the contractor is doing a lot.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah.
It's so, something about it is so specific and so mundane.
Yeah.
And so I do feel like if you opened up like George Orwellian, you know, like,
yeah, sure,
open with that, I feel like it could be like Tommy, he is the contractor, is not bad. Could be worse than that. It's not, you know, my father gave me a piece of advice, I've been turning over my mind ever since. Is that right? That's not quite right. I don't have the Gatsby one. The turning over in my mind is the part that I've got from Gatsby. I don't have it fully memorized. But I feel like it's mundane enough that I was surprised to find that, like, oh, like, there's something a little tasty about that, even though in context it's like, whatever, he's on the phone.
Yeah. And then, of course, the Alan Wake one, because it's such, like, a perfect example of a really bad first line in a way that's, like, kind of perfect. I didn't even bother writing the whole thing out, because it just starts with, like, Stephen King once wrote that nightmares exist outside of logic, and then I said, Alan, you hack.
Okay, except here's the thing, right? Is Alan not just doing exactly what every game developer or, like, frankly, playwright who submitted a play for me to read has ever done on their, like, title page, which is pulling some kind of, like, vibey quote?
Yeah, that's fair.
Like, Alan is just reading it out loud.
You're right.
They could have done that as a splash screen where they're like, nightmares exist outside of logic. Stephen King.
Yeah. You're right. There are a lot of games that do, I think, open either with, like, smart quote or some sort of made-up quote if it's, like, a fantasy game.
And I do feel like smart quote is the right vibe setter for, it's like BioShock does it all the time, Metal Gear does it all the time, and it's like those games are, I don't mean this 100%, this is going to sound negative, and I don't mean it that way, I'm sorry, I can't come, those games are pseudo-intellectual.
Right.
In the right, like they want you to think that they're intellectual, whether or not you think that they actually are.
Yeah.
And so opening with like a quote from a philosopher does, or like a political treatise or whatever, does feel like it sets the right tone regardless of what that quote is, which is sort of interesting.
Yeah, like even something like I put Disco Elysium's in here, which is there is nothing, only warm primordial blackness, but technically even that opens with like a quote by a poet whose name I cannot remember right now, but like the Furies are at home in the mirror, it is their address or whatever. So games like to do that, I think, is open with a little, even, you could even put, like, I've been having these weird thoughts lately in that category. It's the same sort of vibe, you know?
Yeah.
It's a made-up quote, but, like, they put, like, a little...
They put the text on screen.
Yes. And they do that in all the games, right? They all have their own little, weird little Sora monologue at the beginning, so...
Gotta have it.
You gotta have it.
If you do something iconic once, just do it again and again.
It's true. That's called making that's called making a consistent mood, you know?
It's true. Here's what I want to talk about The Last of Us.
Sure.
Have to, right?
Invention of narrative, yeah.
I mean, it would not make sense for that game to not have an opening worth talking about, given that it's the first time that narrative appeared
in a game.
Games.
Yes, exactly.
But so obviously the opening level is quite iconic and like a little bit controversial too, right? Like plenty of people who don't feel great about, oh God, is The Last of Us, do I have to spoiler The Last of Us? Is that what happens in the opening level a spoiler?
No, it's an HBO TV show now, so.
Okay. So of course, okay, you're warned, right? If you like somehow avoided this. Right, the opening level takes place like many years before the actual rest of the game, right? It's the beginning of the outbreak. You play as Joel's daughter Sarah. It features very little of the kind of gameplay that will actually take place in the game, other than walking around.
And some quick time events later.
Right. But you're trying to escape the outbreak. Ultimately, Sarah dies.
Yes.
And then we hit the title screen.
Yes. We do the intro credits, even.
Yeah. And so that was interesting to me, and I wish I had been able to find more examples of this, because in Madelyn Logic Land, there are more games that do things like this, but I could only think of The Last of Us and Kingdom Hearts, wherein we have an opening level that is like kind of separate from the rest of the game. The Last of Us is even a better example of this than Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts is just like vibally separate.
Yeah.
The Last of Us is very much like, actually the way that you're playing here is it's not really giving you a very good sense of what the gameplay of this game is going to be like at all.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. Given that it is like an action adventure game where you shoot zombies and sneak around. Like most of those games would start with you shooting zombies and sneaking around. And it's a bold and interesting choice that they decided it was more important. And this is why I think like intro vibes are so much more important than anything else. Is like we get a little bit of a sense of Joel, but not like a huge one. Like we're playing as a different character. We're not playing in the same way. And we are focused so much more on like, what is the vibe of this game? What is the theme of this game? What is this game going to feel like emotionally, theoretically, than like you as the player. Which is just like it shows up on these like greatest openings lists, and I think deservedly, because it does what it's trying to do.
Yeah. I think it's a very...
Unless you feel like killing a teen girl on screen 30 minutes in leaves a bad taste in your mouth, which, like, fair, but then these games are not going to be for you. Sorry. Yeah.
In that way, it's still successful because it's giving you, like, an accurate picture of itself, even without, like, its gameplay.
Yeah.
Right? Even if you play through that and you're like, oh, this isn't for me. In a way, that's still successful.
But yeah, I couldn't think of... In my brain, there are more games that do this, that have an opening level that feels kind of distinct. But I think that really what I'm reacting to is the idea of starting at level 50 and then getting scaled back to level 1.
Yeah, I think it's more often that you'll cut to somewhere deeper in the story and then cut back than it is to like, oh, here's a little prologue.
Yeah.
I guess, like, Unicorn Overlord kind of does this. Where you play as
I hate that for you.
Your main character's mom, at, like, when she's in the final battle and sending Elaine off to hide on an island. So there's that. There you go. Last of Us and Unicorn Overlord. Equally ambitious narratives. I don't even care if you don't like The Last of Us. It has more ambition than Unicorn Overlord. Sorry.
Hot take. The Unicorn Overlord fans coming for us.
They're coming for me.
Right now. So that was another... I wanted there to be more in that category, because I was like, oh, there are obviously games that do this. And then, I mean, like, actually the better Kingdom Hearts example is Kingdom Hearts 2.
You're right.
I've been thinking of Kingdom Hearts 1, but actually Kingdom Hearts 2 is the better example.
Yeah. Yeah, you do spend the beginning of Kingdom Hearts 2, like, doing little mini games, mostly. Yeah. So, working a part-time job. Which isn't quite what Kingdom Hearts 2 is like, I guess.
Maybe not. Obviously, of course, the best way to open the game is with a vibey music video, as we've established.
Right? Japan worked this out ages ago.
So, that is true that almost every single one of these examples that I have on my list are Japanese games.
I'm actually I've never looked this up, and I really should, because I like them. I've never known why exactly, like, the OPED thing in anime started. Because it's so consistent, right? Like, they have, like, their partner singers, right? And they make special animated sequences for that, and it's carried over to, like, you know, more anime-inspired games, right?
Yeah.
And is it just, like, they just, at some point, the music industry and the animation industry were just like, hey, let's do some cross-promotion, and it became a fundamental part of that? Or was there some other reason? It's interesting, right? I mean, I guess you just have to put the credits somewhere and you make, like, a fun little... I guess we used to have it here, too. Yes. Opening credits. We don't do those anymore. We don't have fun here anymore in America.
Does not matter who made things now.
But yeah, I'd be interesting to know, like, the originations of, like, a musical opening credits, you know?
Yeah. You'll have to look into it.
Why'd we make the Friends intro? That sort of stuff.
Yeah, why Friends?
Why Friends?
No, but, I mean, you've been talking about the Persona 5, like, there's a lot of things about Persona 5 that it's doing that are very, like, tropey for video game openings. It just does them pretty well.
Yeah.
You know, it does the kind of in media res fight, but it also has, like, maybe the vibiest of opening cinematics.
Yeah. The whole series does, for what it's worth. They all have
but
these.
I've only played Persona 5.
Right,
so
yes. I'm sorry,
there weren't... that exists for me.
There weren't, because we started with 3, of course.
Yes. It does make me want to wake up, get out there.
Exactly.
Metal Gear Solid 5, also a sort of different example of this, right? You know, there's, like, different versions of this, right? The Kingdom Hearts ones are always like, let's show you an emotional recap of everything that's happened in these games so far with some thematic symbolism. Persona 5 is also sort of this, like, let's show you the characters looking cool. Metal Gear Solid 5 is like, you're in a coma. It was really interesting to me when I watched it. It's set to The Man Who Sold the World, like a cover of that. And it's just like you're slowly coming into consciousness. It's crazy. It's a crazy opening for a game, including the tit shot.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Keep the gamers interested.
I'm glad Yakuza has come back to the musical intro.
Yeah, I like Zero has it's really not even in the game. It's the like opening movie that.
But it does have one in the game, doesn't it?
Yeah, the music plays in the game, but the one that's better is the smash cut one that plays before you get to the menu.
Where Kiryu's like, "Oh, I got blood on my face."
Yeah. But the better one is the one that's like we get a Kiryu shower shot.
Oh, fair. Yeah.
And we get the Majima like, "Hi, I'm at the Grand" thing to the beat.
Sure.
But no, like that one is not even like 8 is like a Persona 5 like a Persona 5 themed one for me. In that it is just Ichi having a good time to instrumental music, but can't beat the Gaiden, the man who erased his name one. That one is peak vibes. Just so, and would have been better. Would have been better if he got cancer from the cigarettes. Would have been even better, as we all thought.
Sorry, sometimes I think about radioactive waste dropping on Kiryu's head.
That should have been the opening to that game. With the music. We could have Ichiban like, God. I'm the talk of the town. He's like, I work at a nuclear waste plant.
Man.
By choice. No, but yeah, him like being lonely in a bar.
Yeah.
Is like there's no better intro than that. It's good. Also really liked Far Cry 3's Paper Planes one.
Mm-hmm.
Very like alcohol and drug fueled party vibe.
Mm-hmm.
A vibe I'm deeply familiar with.
Yeah. That's what we're all about here at Talk This.
If you take one thing away from Talk This, so it's one big drug and alcohol fueled party. There are also not as many fight big guy openings as I thought there were.
It falls in a similar category as like in a way I would put like Uncharted 2's
You're right.
train climb in
Train
the
is
same
big guy.
Category as fight big guy.
Yeah.
Because for that it is kind of like Uncharted
big guy.
Fight big guy.
I would agree with that. I think it's so interesting that everyone is like, God of War 3, that's the best opening.
Yeah, we fight the big guy.
You fight the big guy. It's another thing that Kingdom Hearts does. Just saying. I'm just saying. No better opening.
Nothing better.
Fight the big guy.
We got our iconic line into our Utada Hikaru music video, into our cool little dreamlike tutorial sequence where Mickey Mouse talks to you, but you don't know it's Mickey Mouse yet. And then you fight a big guy.
Only thing we're missing is a on-rails progression where you get exposition from the scenery.
Yeah.
A la Half-Life, a la Skyrim, a la Ghost of Tsushima, horse riding into the field.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and another one of the game developer had a bunch of like little blogs on this.
They did.
And I did think it was interesting to reflect. This one was by Draven Jolicoeur on the significance of introductions in games. But I did find it interesting to reflect that like when you're making a game, usually you have to pitch the game.
Yeah.
And to either to publishers or to your own company or whatever, or to your partners or whatever. And a lot of
somebody
times,
needs to be convinced.
Yes, somebody needs to be convinced. And a lot of times to do that, you make what's called a vertical slice. And it's essentially like you make like a level or whatever equivalent of a level in your game is that's like complete before you're like even building out the rest of the game, right? Like give you this like one complete section of your game that then you build out from there, right? And a lot of times it makes sense to put this as the introduction to your game because it is probably your most fleshed out and complete and iterated upon part of your game. And so I think the reason you get a lot of like in media res things or like separate sort of sections or whatever is because people made this vertical slice and were like, okay, this is the start of the game now.
Yeah.
So it was interesting thinking about it from that perspective and how like a game development pitching is slightly different than like selling your book or it's sort of, I guess it's sort of like making a pilot, kind of. I think it wasn't this article, it was a different one that compared it a little bit. Eurogamer had The Art of the Start. Compared it a little bit to like a single to a full album. Which is a little bit like that too, right?
Yeah. I mean,
but
in the sense of like, I still listen to albums, right?
Yes,
but,
they said they listen to albums too, but like sometimes your lead single might also be your start off song, right?
Sure.
Because like that's the one that you're trying to hook people on. And so it's a little bit like that also. But it is interesting to think of like the structure of a game that way, right? Of like, okay, we made this vertical slice. This is how it's starting. And then we'll go back and see how it all led up to this, right? That just comes down to like the differences in developing this sort of thing versus other types of media, I guess.
Well, and interesting too in that, like in some ways you might be able to trust your general audience to bear with you a little bit more than an investor, right?
Right.
Like, no wonder so many games start with like, we got to get there. Like both because of that and because of the Steam refund window, right? Of
yes.
course. Like there's plenty of reasons for that. But still, I do feel like overall, you could probably trust the general populace to muddle through. The general populace that's like, no, like, don't worry, it gets good in season 3. Could probably muddle through a little bit more of your game than the thing that you've developed so that someone will give you $1 million.
Yeah. Although it also, like, the Steam refund window, you know, there's problems with this in other areas. I feel like I see every once in a while, like, someone, audiobook or ebook, and, like, they have to pay money because people have returned too many of them, so they have to pay, like, $20. But, yeah, games are also, at least on Steam, probably one of the most easily returnable things, right? Is it 2 hours on Steam? I think Steam has a 2-hour window for a refund. I think it's
2 hours, yeah.
Which one makes it hard to make a short game.
That's so insane to me.
Refund it.
I just want to say that like, you're psychopaths. All of you are psychopaths. Like, what's wrong with you? Okay, sorry. I just like...
I don't remember if they've made changes to the policy for, like, games that are shorter than 2 hours now. I feel like there's some discussion of it.
Doesn't matter. Even if they've done something to fix it.
Yeah.
It's like, that's insane.
But that's the problem. It's like, if they play for an hour and they're like, nah, not totally feeling it right now. They can just, like, literally return it, right? Give it back. Which, like, it's good to be able to return things, right? Consumers.
It certainly is.
Important.
I have never purchased something.
Sometimes you purchase something and it simply does not run on your computer, in which case, sure, yes, you should be able to refund it, right?
Yes.
You've never purchased anything you want to return? Is that what you're going to say?
I've never purchased something for any reason or project with the intention of returning it.
Yeah. Sure.
Not ever.
Not ever. Yeah.
Certainly nothing large. But I would never do that with a short game. That's effed. That's so screwed up.
But even like with a long game, right? You really have to make sure that you're hooking players past that 2-hour refund period so that they're stuck with you.
Or you could just do a 2-hour cinematic and then be like, now it's your turn, and they could forget.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it should be.
It could work.
I also think for that reason, it's also super interesting, like, demos.
Yeah.
Like, also don't really have an equivalent for a lot of things. You mentioned, like, free trials for streaming services. I know this weekend is, like, free Apple right now.
This episode brought to you by... Just kidding.
I know, but, like, in a sense of, like, you don't even have to input your credit card information, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
You just go watch stuff on Apple this weekend. But even, like, the 2-week free trial before we charge you thing, whatever, on whatever site can sort of be considered a demo. Or, like, I guess, like, listening to previews of songs on iTunes, like we used to do, where you can listen to, like, 10 seconds
That's
of
not a
it.
thing anymore, Emma. Come on. I mean, I'm sure it is still a thing, but that's not. Come on.
That's not a reference
What is
the
this,
kids will get.
No. iTunes. You mean
And
Apple
sometimes
Music?
I guess you can read, like, the first few pages of a book on Amazon or whatever. But it's just, like, an interesting little thing of, like, the way to sell the game, you know?
Well, but it's interesting too, though, because, like, and I feel like we experience this and when we go to PAX all the time, is that if your demo is just start the game, that's fine and can work okay if your goal is, well, you're gonna carry over the progress, right? But if your goal is really to sell your game as best as possible, or to be playing it at a, conference thing like PAX, that's often not super effective, especially for the kind of, like, big RPG type games. We do demos like that all the time where we're like, I guess that was fine, but I didn't really feel like I got to anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting also, like, the biggest distinction in these articles often was, like, okay, so you're probably handling your intro differently if you're a story-focused game versus if you're not.
Yeah.
And I do feel like a lot of the ones that we, like, start at the beginning and, like, it doesn't work very well is, like, more gameplay heavy, like resource management or like, whatever type of games where there's a lot of heavy tutorialization at the beginning. Because you have to handle that differently.
Yeah.
In terms of the player that you're courting and how you're introducing things to them. So we talked a lot about, like, story games because I think that's the easiest to talk about, but I actually think that, like, your resource management sort of Crusader Kings stuff or whatever are actually some of the more difficult ones to really, like, hook a player that isn't already invested in your genre, right?
I actually feel like for me, Civilization does a good job of this.
I mean, of course it does. It's a long-lasting series, right?
Well, I just mean to say I don't play a ton of these, and so the fact that it's, like, gamer who's played Civilization thinks the game should be like Civilization. Do you ever think about how Civ 7 is coming out?
Not really, honestly.
Every once in a while I'm reminded.
But, like, I saw Stardew Valley on a list of, like, best intros, and I was like, I bounced so hard off of Stardew Valley's intro that it's very hard for me to look at that and be like, oh, yeah. But it must be good, because he's probably a billionaire, so...
He probably is. No, I don't think... It's tricky, like, both in very different ways. Like, those Stardew Valley or Civilization or anything like that thrive on the let me just play one more turn of it all.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't necessarily feel like the opening of... Now, look, I haven't played Stardew Valley in 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I know they've totally... Like, there's all sorts of new stuff, and I shouldn't think about playing it.
Yeah.
It's so bad that I have this, like, whole long list of games that it's like, I shouldn't think about that. I did manage to watch Quickly Boyfriend play some Balatro, and I didn't.
Good.
But
Stop thinking about it. Stop thinking about it.
But it's not so much important. It's like, it's not even that those games have, like, good openings. It's that they're able to, like, breadcrumb you enough.
Yeah.
right? Like, I don't think it's necessarily that there's anything in the opening that is so great or so hooky, but from my memory, Stardew Valley does a good enough job of, well, in the same way as something like an Animal Crossing or a Harvest Moon or whatever. It gives you enough to do at the beginning that you feel like there's something to carry into the next day to do without it immediately overwhelming you, right? Civilization's the same way in the beginning of like, I want to explore the blank map. I want to fill in map. And I want to see city grow. And like, there's almost always something new. And that's an interesting thing to think about is in those kind of games that really rely on that, the player has gotten sucked in and forgotten what time it is kind of mentality. How do you create an intro that gets them hooked in to that grind as fast as you can without overwhelming them with systems?
Right. Well, any other good game intro that we have not touched on off the top of your head?
Why is nobody else calling Utada to do this?
You know?
Do you think she signed like an agreement that she won't?
No, I don't think so. She did the intros for the 4 Evangelion Rebuild movies. So that was like their thing, I guess, for a bit.
Those are movies, not games.
Sure, yeah.
So she probably has a carve out.
She's like an actual like iconic pop star too, though.
I know that she's an actually iconic pop star. I just feel like no, I've gone through most of them. I mean, ultimately I think the most iconic one, unfortunately, is Skyrim.
Certainly the most enduring.
Yeah.
I think.
It is funny that you don't see, here's my last thought, you don't see more games riffing on each other's intros. You know what I mean? Or, like, we're so obsessed with film. And, of course, film all the time, like, takes iconic shots from other films and rips it off, right? But, and we, you know, there's plenty of I saw plenty of discussion of like Half-Life has this kind of like on rails thing at the beginning, and then like every first person shooter wants to start that way. Yeah. But it's surprising to me that there aren't more like games that do that. Hey, you're up.
I mean, there are a lot of games that are like, you have amnesia. Though, to be fair.
That's true, but it does feel like only the Breath of the Wild nature shot and the Half-Life, you're on rails in first person, like, transcended their things.
Fair enough.
So I'd like to see more games just riffing on each other. I'd like for it to become a closed loop.
Yeah, you want it to become yeah, sure.
Much like Utada's lyrics in Face My Fears for Kingdom Hearts 3. Which make me so angry. I'd like for more openings to make me angry when I go back to them.
Yeah, that's fair.
The ultimate opening is an opening that you go back and you watch it again and you go, I'm angry about that.
Sure.
So, aim for that. That's what you should be going for.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you want to talk about Unicorn Overlord more, or should I?
You know, I'm always eager to talk about the epic narrative of Unicorn Overlord, but I'll let you close us out. I'll hold on to it.
Well, listeners, thanks for tuning in for this first 2025 episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone. I can't believe I didn't look up the first line of Trails of Cold Steel.
Look it up right now and use it for the outro.
Okay.
Listeners, if you enjoyed the show, some questions that you might want to ask us are, why didn't you include this incredibly iconic opening that I loved? Why are you so obsessed with Kingdom Hearts? Are you 12? Grow up. Why did you not just say the Skyrim opening over and over and over again? Or if you have thoughts on, like, what else makes a good opening? Or if there are other, like, opening lines from video games that you quote. If I'm right that Tommy, listen to me, he is the contractor, would make a good opening line for a novel. If you have thoughts about any of those things or anything else, hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat for our main episodes, and read our blog featuring Emma's... Are the OPEDs? Are they up?
This week.
Coming up soon.
Come up this week.
Very appropriate for this week where we talked a lot about kind of like anime-style openings. But also Thoughts on Arcane. If you're craving some Kingdom Hearts after this episode, you can go read Clickbait Boyfriend. Lots of good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But most importantly, if you enjoy the show, you should subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn. Is Stitcher gone? I'm in a time warp. Spotify, Pandora Podcasts online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Cast. Look, just like find wherever you listen to podcasts, see if we're there. We're probably there. And subscribe. Next week, some games.
Oh my gosh. I forgot to open the list so I could remember. I was busy looking up the start of Cold Steel. Our old game is Shovel Knight. Right. And our new game frick. I don't know.
It's a good excuse.
3 weeks ago. It was 2 weeks ago. Come on.
This is the 2 weeks episode. It was last year. Give us a break. I'm gonna have to look up the opening lines to these games too.
Yeah.
Well, that's our show. Thanks for tuning in. Emma, close it out with the iconic opening line from...
Sure.
Which Trails
I
of Cold Steel? The first one?
I forgot the first Cold Steel also opens in Media Res. So in the words of Imperial Army Guardsmen... It's no use! We can't even scratch them!